Hey everyone, welcome to episode 357 of This is Whole Life. And before we get started, big props to everyone that's listening. I shared this with Jeff the other day, and I know it's hard to maybe put a firm grasp on it when you just hear numbers, but when you see it on a graph and you actually see the numbers, in 2 out of the last 3 months, we've had over 2,000 downloads in the last 2 out of 3 months. And the one in between was 1,200.
I was actually surprised.
So that means over 5,400 people have listened and downloaded the show in just the last 3 months. And over the course of time, I was checking another stat, which is a unique listen or a unique listener means the listener comes from the same device. It comes from the same IP address. So if you've listened to the podcast more than once, you're a unique listener. You're someone that has listened to more than one episode. And it's a pretty good gauge by the latest standards as to how many people listen to your show. And our show, it's about 6,500 people that listen to our show, have listened to our show more than once. Wow. That's a big chunk of people.
Thank you.
From like 80 some.
Thank you so much for listening.
80 some countries, and I'm really proud of the work. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And someone's been sharing a lot of podcasts to make those numbers. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That. So I wanted to start with that. Oh, and a church retreat update. Josh's morning message has already gotten about the same number of listens as a message that's been out for a month.
Oh, wow.
So you guys have eaten up that hour and a half. Or no, that was the Monday. Or no, that was the regular one. That was our podcast from the A-frame. So long episode, and we're already crushing numbers this month. So thank you for that. And then third, everyone stopped me and I totally forgot to mention this, but I didn't get one person that said no to the new podcast idea. I got a lot of thumbs up.
Okay.
About we should do this new podcast. We should give it a whirl.
Okay.
But more than one person had the same suggestion, and I don't think they talked about it.
Okay.
Okay. They thought, how cool would it be for people that listen all the time that maybe they get a chance to read the story?
Ooh.
What if they came into the studio, maybe even after, like in between Sabbath school, I'm here in the in my office where we record. And you could read the story, so we could have people that wanted to, if they could come in and read the story, and maybe if they wanted to come on Tuesday, maybe they could be a part of that week's episode every once in a while, and that would bring in a little bit different flavor from our listeners. So that was another suggestion.
Yeah.
And we could figure out maybe how to make that work.
Yeah.
So anyway, something to think about. If you have a suggestion on that, 407-965-1607 or podcast at WholeLife.Church, and let us know, because so far it's all good feedback. All like, yeah, I'd totally listen to that. So
nice.
There you go. All right. Negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement. Melanie, since you were the person who got the negative reinforcement correctly, could you give us a rundown on what that is real quick and just like, hey, this is what it is and this is what it isn't?
I think Jeff should also be a pretty big expert.
Yeah,
on that.
I'm thinking I'm not the expert in the room on psychological things.
Well, that's passing the buck. That was nice. That was smooth. That was really nice.
Team effort.
There is it's a hard one because you think of punishment usually as negative reinforcement. Yeah. But it's usually the idea of taking something away to create that condition that you want.
Okay,
that's what we usually think of as negative reinforcement.
So what would be something you would take away to make that happen? Negative reinforcement. Give us an example.
So if a child, say for instance, Pavlov's dog started to, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the idea was that when the bell would go off, the dog would start to, if there was food involved, in other words, the bell would go off when food was offered, and then when food wasn't offered and the bell would go off, so in a sense, you take something away from that conditioning and it creates what the desired response that you want.
Okay.
So in the case of our sermon, slavery. You remove slavery from the equation and show why.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that is a pretty huge one, actually.
Yeah.
And the one that I'm going to operate here on a much simpler level.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Let's go. So we're going to go all 3 levels here.
No, actually, just so, and this is something I remember from my Psych 101 class.
Yay.
So if you have a headache and you go take an ibuprofen and your headache goes away, then what are you going to do the next time you get a headache? You're going to go take ibuprofen.
You're going to take some ibuprofen.
And that's going to make your headache go away. And so whether whether it actually makes it go away or it's a placebo effect, either way, something negative goes away when you do this action. So that negatively reinforces it. That's what I remember. Is that what do you think, Jeff?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah. It doesn't sound right, though. I can see why Ken got it, because as soon as you said that, I'm like, wait a minute. Are we sure Melanie was right? Because this is
well,
it doesn't sound right. Even though I totally believe you, but it doesn't seem to fit. No.
I'm gonna kind of jump in there a little bit. A positive real simply, if you want your child to do their homework,
okay,
or you're hoping that their child would, you would say, okay, you're going to get candy if you do your homework. That's what I want. Or you could also say...
Meaning positive reinforcement.
Yeah, that would be positive reinforcement. Yeah. You're adding something to condition them, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or you could say, I'm taking your phone away until you get your homework done. Would be something that I'm taking away to get them conditioned.
For negative reinforcement.
As a sense of negative
And so what is it called when you use both? Because as you use that analogy, Sparkle, it's like the positive reinforcement is, look, you want to turn the TV on to your favorite show for half an hour. You've got to do your chores. You've got to do your homework. You have to do, there's like 4 things you need to do. And if you don't, and then if that doesn't work, it's like, but if you don't, then you're not going to, and you're going to get in trouble. So she likes to say that if she even just misses a little bit, wow, that's it. I'm grounded, for the negative reinforcement.
But that's punishment.
But that's punishment, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's different.
A little bit different.
So basically you're removing a negative you're removing something. You're removing something that's undesirable.
But in this story, I thought it was a little bit odd. I don't know if I've ever looked at it as, how do we usually word it? That, God rescued them from slavery, or, he led them out of Egypt. But it's all more from the side of, we're going to the promised land. So it's almost like, well, you're just leaving slavery behind, is more so than you're removing it from my life, which, it's the same thing, but it feels like there's a different connotation if you say it differently. Anyone else feel that way, or is it just me?
Well, I think what's for me, and as I was formulating this, what I think kind of came out to me was that when you look at God just repeatedly throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament says, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt, the land of slavery. Mm-hmm. And there's just multiple texts. I think there's 67 in the New Living Translation, other translations, just depending on how the wording is. Yeah. But in that, there's 67 times where that phrase is used, out of Egypt. And what becomes significant to me is that in Exodus chapter 20, to preface the 10 Commandments, which it would seem that the Israelites have somewhat forgotten these, to preface it, God starts it off by saying, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt. And so he's kind of saying, do this, remember that negative that I've taken out. I've taken this negative out, and now I want to talk to you about something some behaviors I'd like you to do.
But see, then I think my mind goes to, I did this for you, and now I'm looking for, I'm looking for a little payback. I'm looking for this, and I've already done something for you, and maybe this is the human aspect. I've done something for you. First off, you should be really happy I did it for you. 2, I think you owe me. And 3, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, the commandments, this is why I always go back to when Zed talked about that they were less commandments in his view as they were a coming alongside of and a request of the Israelites. And what did Jeff, I have looked forever to try to find where he told us that on the podcast. He said, I don't call them commandments. because I think the word is better translated as, the word wasn't request.
Oh, you're talking about Zed?
Zed,
Mm-hmm.
Stefanovic, when he went through the 10 Commandments with us on the podcast, and it wasn't part of a message though. He came and because I've looked for the message and I can't find it.
It was actually during a, I think it was the Jesus and a Cup of Joe, I think it was, at the church retreat.
Right. And then
he said that.
And he brought it back to when he was on the podcast, and I listened to the episode and he didn't say it, but he was talking with us about it. And I wish I could remember that word. Next time I see him, I have to get it. But he said it wasn't so much a command like the iron fist that we think about, but it was more of, as a group and as a family, this is what we're going to do together. We're going to do these things. And
yeah, I think he was saying that much like these are our, and he didn't use the word blessings, but these are our kind of our statements of what was the word?
I know, and it drives me crazy because I think it would be, for me, it was really handy. And
was it commitments?
Commitments.
It might have been commitments.
It was the commitments. And it's like, it's different when it's a commitment or a command, because otherwise I always feel like this part of the story just gets jammed up into, I did it for you, you owe me. And if you don't, that's where we get the Old Testament God that wants to smack us, unless it's more of a commitment where we're into this together.
Yes and no. But,
yes and no. Okay.
But think about the 10 Commandments are behaviors that God's asking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have no other gods. That's a behavior. Don't do that. Honor your father and mother. That's a behavior. So is God punishing if you don't do it, or is it's like, I guess for me, it's kind of like saying to my kids, don't walk too near the side of that cliff because the ground could let out and then gravity will do something. I don't hate you.
Right.
If you choose to walk over there, it's not that I hate you. It's just, that's the way that cliffs and gravity work. If
they fall, I didn't punish them.
I wasn't. And so I'm trying to remove, and I caught you last time because I was walking with you, but if I'm not with you,
or you're not with me.
And that's, and I suppose that analogy can start breaking down really quick. But
that's what happens when you go first.
Right. But my point, I think, is that God is basically saying, look, the things that I'm asking, the behaviors I'm asking you to adopt will keep you out of slavery. It'll keep you out of oppression. It's going to be good for you. I'm removing a negative when you do this behavior, not because I'm punishing you, but just because that's the way, gravity works.
Did he do the slavery thing on purpose so that they would equate what the Egyptians did to them as far as being enslaved to, if you don't take my suggestions, I just know because I'm God that it's going to be worse for you, and kind of like another type of slavery if you don't? I mean, was that on purpose, or did
God make them slaves on purpose?
Or did he use that? No, did he use the analogy to try to help them understand what kind of negatives he was trying to keep them from by using that? Do you think? I just thought it was interesting that
Melanie's scrunching up her face. So let's hear what Melanie has to say.
I'm just enraptured by this interaction. I'm listening.
with no opinion.
I don't know. I'm beginning to be able to read Melanie's face.
I felt like I was totally with you. I felt like she's like, guys, come on, bring this back around.
Yeah. I'm going to keep listening.
Okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Jeff?
Well, first of all, I do think we're still back to this negative reinforcement piece. And I don't think God wants us to fall back. I don't think that's when we think of, when I'm thinking of when I still think of negative reinforcement, I gave the example of the kids with homework. The issue is you don't want your kids to not do homework. I guess the idea is you want your kids to end up doing well, just like God wants us to end up doing well. So we do things to encourage something from happening that isn't going to be good.
Right.
So in this whole piece of slavery, I think what happened, you look at the children of Israel, and when they all of a sudden they come back out of slavery, and everything is like laws. And I think that's when we started. And Melanie, you've done some history on this too. I think that's when, didn't we establish the Pentateuch and the Torah after that was post-exile, right?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I think the Pentateuch was post-exile. They put together Genesis, Exodus. These 5 books were put together after the exile.
I'm not sure, because I know that, what was it, Josiah digs up the book of the law.
Right.
But that's pre-exile.
But isn't that Exodus? What I'm saying is they were put together as a Pentateuch.
Oh, okay. You're saying it became one.
Yeah.
Pentateuch, for the record, means those
5
books.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So you kind of get this idea that we're trying to avoid slavery again. We're trying to avoid, and that's that piece that I think you were talking about. So I wonder if it's coming after this exile time that people are going, we need to never do that again. We need to get our people to never do that again.
Because it's still got to be super fresh in their mind. I mean, it's not like they would have forgotten by that point. And
so I wonder if the behavior that God was trying to enforce was not necessarily the behaviors in the 10 Commandments, but maybe, like Ken, like you said before, maybe those 10 Commandments were like the sunscreen that you put on to prevent. And maybe the behavior that God, I'm just off the cuff here. Maybe the behavior that God is trying to establish is that of trust. The behavior I want from you is to trust me. So I removed this negative. And here are a list of laws, commitments, whatever you want to call them, that will eliminate the potential for other negatives to start creeping back in, or other kinds of slavery to start creeping back in that damage the relationship with God or damage the relationship with other people. So I don't know that it was necessarily so much about the 10 Commandments as it was about the process of that relationship of trust.
Off the cuff, Melanie's my new favorite.
Well, I think we need to give her. I think she's actually officially. If this is her first time off the cuff, welcome to the team.
Yeah,
we're so glad to have you here, Melanie.
We all studied before we got here.
Well, usually I use the other cuff. I use the other cuff.
I feel like you officially get your podcast badge today, then, because
is that a real? Is the podcast badge?
I wish that somebody would come. They would just call us on most of these things.
I know.
Well, no. Usually I like to think for like 2 or 3 seconds before I open my mouth on the podcast. But this time I was just sort of bypassing.
Like I said, here's your badge. Welcome to the club.
True or false? Podcasting is an honor. I think that's a quick back reference to a Saturday Night Live program. If you were not at church retreat, we found out there was a whole bunch of fraudulent honors out there we didn't know about. Yeah. We set the record straight, though.
By the way, that was fantastic, Molly. You said exactly what I was trying to say in a much better way.
So, given what you just said, then how do I know which God I'm talking to? I mean, because I have to have faith that really is who God is. I have to know him somehow to know that he's benevolent enough, that he's good enough, that he's proven himself enough to, because maybe I haven't had slavery as a people to go, wow, that's a big move. He picked, that's a major heavy lifting. What if haven't really had that in my life? How do I know that that's the same God that is just going, hey, I just want to prevent and make this a little bit easier? The more you know me, probably the more you're going to trust me, have faith in me. And it's not that God of the Old Testament that we so often just go, oh, I don't really know if I like that God of the Old Testament. He's a little feisty. He's a little quick to anger. People, touch the ark and get shot. They're immediately done. How do I know which God I'm dealing with? How do I get to that point if I'm not sure? Because it sounds like that God is a lot easier to be in trust and communication and relationship with than the God I'm probably fearing. Again, maybe the commandment versus the commitment.
And that's maybe why God said to them, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt. Because he was trying to clarify his benevolence to them. And so...
What does that clarification look like
For you
today? I mean, I know it's going to be different for everyone, but I mean, what is that clarification? How does Ken know? I mean, you didn't just go, well, I changed my course of my career. I'm going to become a pastor, and now everything is, complete and solid, and I've got this.
For me, God clarifies it on a pretty regular basis. I think you have an option in life. You can look at the good things that happen in your life, and you can say that's chance. It's this, that, or another. But just to put it in real terms, I mean, when we bought the house that we bought, we knew that it was going to need a new roof. We bought it about 2 years ago, actually, 2 years ago, April.
Right about that, yeah.
And we knew it was going to need a new roof. And the market being what it is, the seller was not going to be doing that. And so, we got the house knowing that we're going to need to put a new roof on it. And, life happens, and the money that we thought we were going to have for it went other places. And so I've been, just to be honest with you, just stressing out a little bit about where the money was going to come from to take care of that roof. And, I've been postponing having the roofing people look at it. I've had one person gave me a quote, and I'm like, oh my word, this is not going to happen. So finally I put it off as long as I dared, and I'm starting to have nightmares where water's pouring into my house. Right. And so, we had another company come out, take a look. They gave us a better quote, and I still was trying to figure out where, even with the better quote, I was trying to figure out where the money was going to come from. And for me, I have been through so many things with God. I just put it in front of God. I said, God, look, I don't know what to do. I know I need to get this done. It's got to get taken care of. It's, otherwise there's going to be a bigger problem. And just Rochelle and I just prayed about it. We put it out there, just didn't know. And just to kind of, for us, and this doesn't always happen. This sounds like one of those stories where I know stuff doesn't always work out perfectly. Like in this particular case, so to me, it's still not perfect. But the money came through, and for me, in a miraculous way, my income taxes have usually been costing me money, and this year there was money that I didn't expect to have coming back that helped me towards the financial goals that I had, and like I said, there's been other times where I prayed, and that hasn't been what happened. There was roughness, but there's every time I've had a sense of God with me. In those moments. And so for this one, I'm really grateful. I just put it there, and I just knew God was going to figure something out, and he did. And so for me, I review the things in my life. I look at all the different things. I can look at there are terrible things that happen too, but I look at how God has been with me through those things, how he's been with me in the past. I review that. I look at what's happening in my life now, and rather than saying, well, that's just good luck this year. For me, it's me just trusting God and saying, look, I think that you had something to do with that. I think you brought me out of the land of slavery. I think you brought me out of these different places. I think you had something to do with how things are going right now. So I don't know if you asked me for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think that works for everybody. I think that maybe maybe my faith is a little bit more simplistic or something in that case. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah.
But for me, that's what works in my walk. If you're asking me, I also, like I said, I have friends who've gone horrific things, and they've prayed about it. I remember talking to one person that just been through the ringer, and they said, I just never feel like God ever talks to me. God never has anything to say to me. In all my life, I have never heard God talk to me once. And I didn't have a good answer. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, because for me, I hear God talking, not
audibly,
but I feel God. I experience that. And so when somebody tells me that they're not, all I can do is pray about that and say, Lord, I really, if you're there, I'd love it if you would, if you'd let them hear you. And I can't explain. I reject the fact that they're not looking. I know they're looking. I know that person was looking. I know that person wanted to experience God. So, these are the difficult things. So if you're one of those people listening, you're like, well, man, Ken, I'm so glad God came through for you on my roof. I need a roof, and life isn't working out quite that way for me, then, what I say to you is, man, I'm praying that God shows you himself, that God reveals to you in a way that you see and that you can hear. And if God's not doing that, I'll keep praying, and I don't put that judgment that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I don't know. Yeah. Melanie kind of preached about that a couple weeks ago, a little bit. And because, like I said, I love telling miracle stories. I do, because for me, I see God working, and for me, it's awesome. I love seeing those things, but I also recognize that other people just have a completely different experience.
Yeah. No, I think that's valid. I mean, we all find different ways that we hear things or we see things, and maybe it's got a lot to do with the way we interpret the world around us, whether that's a more positive or a negative, or maybe how you feel about your fellow man in general. But I think there's a lot of times where sometimes the simplistic is I can choose, and I can look at that track record, and even if it's not a great one where you've heard God audibly say something, but when you look at all the other options, there's nothing that's any better. And or even you have to dig a lot deeper to try to find an explanation for it than to just give the credit to God. And
in particular, when I look at those 10 commandments, I just think the world would be a better place if everybody did those things. I think people would be happier.
If you could agree to the 10 and just say, let's do these.
I just think overall as principles that the world would be, if people weren't murdering each other, if we didn't spend time wishing that we had things that weren't ours, that other people have. And look, we all struggle with these things. It's like, but I know my life would be happier if I was, spent a little less time wishing that I had what the guy next to me, the lady next to me had. Yeah. I think that would be better. And I look at those 10 commandments and I just think, those are good things. It's a loving God that says, hey, this is how to have a relationship with me. This is how to have a relationship with the people around you. I think when we start moving into Deuteronomy and Numbers and some of the rules that we see there, I think we're looking at rules that were handed down for a 40-year camping trip. Yeah. And they had an important purpose. Some of them I can't figure out what they were, to be honest with you. But others of them, I'd say the vast majority of it, I can look at and go, okay, I can see why God might have asked them to do this or do that. It makes sense in the context that they were in, why God would do that.
In that time period, yeah.
Well, and just as a little tiny detour, some of those are casuistic laws, which means that they were applied to a very particular situation. That maybe happened once and went before someone who was judging, and then that law was created, but it wasn't created for everyone for all time. It was like this precedent was established here.
Well, it does get interesting, doesn't it? Because like I said, for me, the 10 Commandments seem pretty universal, but there are, I shave the side my beard, the sides of my beard on a pretty regular basis, which is I'm not supposed to do that according to Deuteronomy. And I also don't put fringes on my clothing, and I also wear blended clothing.
That was very tedious. I quit doing the fringes thing a long time ago.
Did you quit that a while ago?
That was very tedious. I just couldn't get down with that.
Okay. I also noticed you must have given up on the fringes of your beard a while ago.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Although it does look like you're growing your hair out a little bit. So
well, it's I was mentioning that my mom noticed that too. She's in town, and so she likes to make sure that I'm looking good, and so it's I am due for a haircut. So. And
there are people who actually do that,
and
it's meaningful to them,
absolutely,
religiously. So I wouldn't, I don't know, I wouldn't disparage that necessarily, but I think it does make sense to look at them and say, does this make sense for our context?
But there's none of the 10 that I could say would be not good for me, or something that wouldn't improve. Like you said, if we all just, of course, if we all agreed on the 10, we probably wouldn't still be here, right? Maybe. Could be. That's off the cuff, Randy. I didn't really think about that one. Yeah. Sorry, Melanie. You looked over me.
No, because it's just like, so I think that there are exceptions to lots of different rules. I mean, if you're hiding Jews in your basement and somebody knocks on your door and says, hey, do you have anybody in your house? And you answer no, that is the right thing to do, regardless of the fact that the commandment says, don't bear false witness. Of course, bearing false witness is That's a complex thing in itself. But I guess I'm just complicating things here. That's all I'm saying.
But see, that's the part that I think when we talk about messages like this is the part where you want answers. People want answers because you're in the struggle, or you're feeling like, man, it's been a long time since I've had a win. I've had my Egypt out of slavery experience. I've prayed over something and it was a big sin in my life, or it was a relationship that needed mending. And I really felt like at that time God came through, and maybe I gave him the credit, and your faith is renewed, your sense of Christianity and your sense of your relationship with Jesus feels really solid. And then it seems like you go on this long thing where you're just kind of doing life, and then, well, shouldn't there be more, or shouldn't there be something else that happens that maybe boosts me up or makes me feel something that I haven't felt for a while? And then, Satan uses that as easily, very much as doubt, and as, well, see, you didn't have to do all this. Nothing's changed. It's all been good. And this is where I really feel like people that are struggling, sitting on the outside, almost feeling like they're looking in, going, well, wow, man, that's great. Like Ken said, glad he came through on that roof for you, and be genuine about it. But then also on the same turn, feel like, man, I haven't felt even a small win in a long time. And I know there's no hard and fast answers, but that's kind
of the Melanie's. Well, isn't it nice that Jesus loves you?
Yeah, exactly.
I
feel like the further we go, sometimes we go back to those.
But again, I think that things start falling in place sometimes when we look at the bigger picture as opposed to focusing on the minutia. Parts. And if we focus in on the two commandments being love God, love people, to very generalize, that gives us a little bit of an understanding of the nuance that goes along with the commandments. So is it loving people to tell the truth when somebody is going to have their life taken from them?
Yeah.
And that's where we get into some interesting ethical discussions, and I think it's complicated. And I think that people who want to make the Bible absolutely black and white in every case,
that's a tough one.
That you really start running into some problems, because so you would tell the truth if
sure,
somebody came to your door and said, I'm going to just is so and so there? If they are, I'm going to murder them. Would you do that? I can tell you, as a summer camp director, we had somebody show up at camp to pick up a child at one time that I knew was not supposed to be there, and so I lied straight up. They're not ready to go, and I called the police, and we waited until the police got there to sort things out. But I lied, and I was happy to do that because it was protecting that person. And so, and we can, each one of the commandments we could talk about one by one, I suppose, and go through. But overall, when you think about what it means to love people and love God, those are a pretty good broad generalization. It's usually good not to lie. It's usually good to tell the truth. It's usually good not to murder people.
Yeah. And I think it also has to do with maturity too, because, for example, the younger your child is, the more rules you have for the child, right? And the more specific those rules have to be. Did you clean your room? Did you brush your teeth? Did you do this? Did you do that? And my youngest is 27. I'm not going to show up at his house and knock on the door and ask him if he brushed his teeth, because he is old enough to manage himself now and to think through those things and understand, oh, this is what I need to do to be a healthy person. So I think the same thing can be true with God. We can have all these rules, or as we sort of mature and be able to, think at a more mature level, then we can apply those things appropriately without having to have all the minutia of the rules. Does that make sense?
I like that, because I think then I can put myself in without, at least for me, it doesn't feel bad to say, well, I might not be as spiritually mature as Jeff or Ken to feel that, or to have that realization, or to maybe identify things that they may identify in their journey, or vice versa, and be okay with the fact that maybe that's just not where I am in my walk with Christ yet. But and to not let it slow me down from continuing to be in that walk. That's really good. I like that.
I think too, there's this idea of accountability in terms of all of this, and that the commandments help us understand that we are not accountable to ourselves. In other words, we are not our own God. That in this relationship, I have in a sense, a dependence, a commitment. And that's why I like Zed's word, thanks Ken, of a commitment. These are our commitments because it creates an accountability of I don't answer to myself. There's a higher side to this relationship.
All right. Well, let's get to the questions, and we have just a couple, and I think this one we answered. So
which one?
But I'm going to ask it, and if we did, and you want the answer, you're going to have to go back to Speaking of Grace, which if you swipe up in today's show notes, you will see a link, and that will be the most recent episode where I believe Ken may have answered this question with Haas in our Q&A. How does Pastor Ken's analogy work when we look at people groups who face adversity by following Jesus? I think you answered that one, didn't you?
I did, but I think I also said that we would probably talk about it a little bit more on the podcast because it was a good question.
Yeah, well,
so I'd love to hear what Melanie and Jeff have since I've already answered it.
Yeah, you already did your part.
I think just to give a quick summary of what I said is I said I don't think every metaphor works well across every every in every situation. This might be one of those times, and so I think the person's asking what happens, is God not particularly happy is he punishing people who are suffering, or, if there's certainly people who have historically found themselves in slavery. Does that mean that God was mad at them or something, that he didn't bring them out of slavery, or if they're being persecuted? And like I said, this is where the metaphor doesn't work. You may not be, I think that the number of people throughout history have found themselves not physically free, but have been able to find themselves spiritually free in the midst of forced servitude. And it's an unfortunate thing when unfortunate's not even the right word. It's a horrible thing when human beings enslave other human beings and make them less than the image of God. And so, again, I don't think this metaphor perfectly. I don't think you're out of God's favor if you find yourself in hard times. And I don't think that just because you follow the rules, it means that everything goes perfectly.
Okay. That kind of goes back to the whole idea of negative and positive reinforcement again, is that are we following Jesus to get a positive thing like his favor? That's sort of how we think of it. Or are we doing things to avoid a negative piece of hell or persecution, and so now I'm going to be good so that I can avoid that negative piece. I think that this is a relational question. I think that if we're just trying to figure out how to manage outcomes, then we're always going to be struggling with why are the motivations or what's. But if I desire a relationship with Jesus and that's what I go for, that's different than an outcome.
Yeah, I like that, Jeff.
I think too, we have to be. There are some unfortunate things about metaphors, and sometimes metaphors that are used in the Bible that we continue to use equate things with sin that people have no control over. People have no control over the fact that they've been enslaved, for 400 years. That's not something they did to themselves. So to compare that kind of slavery to sin doesn't work.
Yeah, that's hard.
When you compare, a sort of a disability of some kind to sin. I was blind, but now I see. Those kinds of things. I mean, we have to be careful with the metaphors that we use because they can stretch in directions that we don't want them to stretch, that don't really work.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do with that because those metaphors are there, but I think it's important to have a sensitivity to that.
Yeah. Make sure we're keeping it in context. Or whatever context we're putting it in, hopefully we're not pulling it out of another one on the back end as we're pulling it this way for our use. All right, kind of along the same vein a little bit. No Name, which we were getting more creative each week with our names online. Is the Sabbath a kind of negative strength or the way to walk humble with God? And this was a little bit. It was within a larger context in the course of the conversation. And I think it kind of came through. There was Anonymous asked, "Do you think God today is still trying to take us out of Egypt, this world?" And it was part of that conversation where the rules or the commandments or the commitments, such as the Sabbath, I mean, are those? Can we use them as a negative? Are they a kind of a negative strength, or is that just taking those and making them humble, staying humble while we walk through this? In that case, is God still trying to use those to take us out of Egypt or this world? And I thought that was an interesting question, and because the Sabbath can mean so much to so many different people, I know it's hard to add. It's kind of hard to answer that question as well.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think you're right. I think it has to do with how you look at the Sabbath. I mean, you can look at the Sabbath as a rule. Mm-hmm. You can look at the Sabbath as sort of an end time test of loyalty of some kind. You can look at Sabbath as participating in a vision of shalom, where you want to be in harmony with God, in harmony with people, in harmony with the earth, and that is it's a beautiful way to do that. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's not a matter of, okay, I must be obedient to this. It's more like, hey, I buy into this. Yeah. I like where this is going, and I want to be part of it.
I like it that it's important to for my family. I like that it's important to my family. It's important to my kids. They look forward to it, and that together we do the best that we can with whatever rules we have as a family to focus on God and focus on each other and that together time that we just frankly don't get that much during the week. So, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think about this from the standpoint of I love being with my wife, and I enjoy those times. And we have a date night every Thursday. We take a date night. Nice. And it's fairly sacred these days. We try not to plan anything on that night. And time. I think our staff knows that. So when they call me, I probably am not going to answer the phone and so on and so forth. I would hate to be, in a sense, now graded on how much I love my wife by how I plan or how I make my dates. So I think we have to realize this in a relational context much more than a kind of a grading base, or loyalty base.
Yeah, it really just comes back down to that, that kind of final thought idea is that God didn't bring them out of Egypt to keep a bunch of rules, and He brought them out of Egypt for freedom, to give them the opportunity to connect with Him if they chose to do it, and to connect with each other and to be in deep relationship. And I think it's just so important for us to remember that God really cares about relationships. He really cares about the relationship we have with Him, and He really cares about the relationship we have with each other. Yeah. And when you look at any of these things, if the action becomes more important than the person, you've lost the point.
Well, I think in that case, and that really answers that question, is God still trying to take us out of Egypt? And I think absolutely. I mean, He's promised to come back. And if we look at these as like, again, almost like you just described the Sabbath, Melanie, where it's, I'm buying into this, and I can look at what you might think the Sabbath might mean, or the end of times and all those things. And you can fret, or you can just go, God's got it, I'm on board. And I think this is the best way to charge forward, and with maybe the least amount of stress involved. And when if God tells me something different, hopefully that's one of those things we'll learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that God's bringing people out of Egypt every day, and I think that I'd like to think that WholeLife is a bit of a promised land. That when people, I like to think that when people come to WholeLife, they experience unconditional love, and the love of God and the love of other human beings. And there is a lot of Egypt out in the world where that is not the experience. And not just out in the world. There's a lot of Egypt that has crept into Christianity.
Sure.
Where there isn't that unconditional love that is shown and given and experienced. And I think think it's important that be a culture, because that's the culture God desires.
I'm glad it's our culture.
Again, with great apologies to anyone who is Egyptian who happens to be listening, that you are also part of an unfortunate metaphor.
Oh, man, yeah, that's true, too.
Exactly.
I'll have to look online and see if we have any listeners from Egypt. But, well, of course, just because you listen from the country doesn't mean that your nationality
Yeah, fortunately, there's
either.
no Babylon anymore.
Yeah, right.
Gets a little easier one.
All right, we got 2 questions and a comment to go. Aaron asked, how do we stop interpreting the Bible the way we were taught and instead that God is protecting us or helping free us, kind of like your story with Kyla, like, hey, if you just don't push. And if you pull, how do we and that's again, I love the fact that no one is afraid to ask the hard questions that there's not great answers for, and have to wrestle a little bit with those. But I think it goes back to what we've talked about a little bit already with, you've got to get to that point in your journey. You may not be at that point where you've even realized, like Kyla hadn't at the time, she didn't know that Mom and Dad are here to help me, probably, but do they have my best interest at heart? Because I've been screaming and they're not here yet, so maybe they don't, right? So I think it's part of that process of becoming more spiritual.
What kind of horrible people would put cupboard doors in a kitchen?
In a kitchen, why would
who
you
would do that? Why would who would
That was a trap. This was a test.
It was set up. Right?
So yeah.
So read the question one more time,
Yeah,
because it
what's
was a
the
good
beginning?
question.
How do we stop interpreting the Bible the way we were taught, and instead that God is protecting us or helping free us? So that is the assumption there, is that's not what you were
taught. That's a good question, though. That is a good question. I think one of the things that's helped me, and I'm sure everybody that is that I rethink and redo and sometimes even retell the stories that I've always been told. Sometimes, we think of children's stories and we look at those and all of a sudden we realize they were, we told those stories to our children for a particular reason. But, just like Paul says, when we get older and we can, so I would go back to these stories and dig, all of a sudden you realize the nativity scene is a completely different story, no matter which, how you come at it, from even which gospel you read,
which one you read it in, yeah.
So I think it's important for us to not take the stories that we've always been heard at face value, but we come back and we say, let's revisit those stories and have fun with them.
See where we are in our next place in life before, and then read them again. Continue on.
Yeah, if you're asking that question, you're probably on the right track anyway. Just be open to learning. Be open to the fact that you don't know everything and that there's more information out there. And then go about acquiring that information the way that you best acquire information. Some of us like to do deep research. Other people tend to be a little bit more, intuitive or having conversations with people. But whatever it is that the best way that you gain information, go about gaining it, and keep a mind that's open to hearing things.
I think we just answered Sharon's question, which is our final question. She said, I have a statement from Desire of Ages, page 72, which says, temptation, poverty, adversity, maybe leaving something behind, is the very discipline needed to develop purity and firmness. And her question is, how can we see clearer his purpose and God's love for us when we're going through these circumstances? And I think what we just talked about in answering that previous question, I think applies here too. And I really like what you said, Jeff, is like you read the story for your kids, but then you read a different story when your kids become in middle school and they have questions. And then as teenagers, it keeps building. And
it's pretty disheartening when you see him creating the world and like 6 or 7 chapters later, he's destroying everything. So you kind of have to go, okay, what is really going on here? So is that really, when you start putting all these things together, it's really important that we see a little bit deeper with more, with clearer eyes, so to speak.
And I think go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and kind of maybe jumping back to the previous question, there's no such thing as a pure reading of Scripture. Mm-hmm. Anything that you have been taught about Scripture has come from a particular interpretation. And one thing that I think is helpful if you're a deep research kind of person, if not, that's okay, is to think critically about who is benefiting from this particular interpretation, who is being potentially marginalized or oppressed from this particular interpretation. And sometimes and recognizing that there are many different ways to interpret. These are called hermeneutical lenses. You can look through a particular hermeneutical lens that will provide a particular interpretation. And sometimes you go to the text with whatever that is, and then you get out of the text what you want to find in it. But I think that it is helpful to understand that there are multiple ways to interpret things, and any interpretation you have is going to be something that is influenced by a particular interpretive lens.
And I would say continue to listen to messages that happen here at WholeLife Church, because I feel like, we have a long history of not only, Andy, who was here for a long time, and Jeff. I mean, you've preached here countless times, and even guests that have been invited to preach here. I feel like usually come at a subject like, and Melanie, I mean, brand new here, a couple months, but 3 messages that, when you said, I don't think you've ever heard, the story of doubting Didymus, in exactly this same way before from this angle. And to me, that's some of the most helpful ways is for people who are deep dive thinkers and researchers like you guys are. It helps all of us when we hear a message that, and I'm not saying you always agree with it. It's like, I don't know if I believe that or not. But it's
Come on, Randy, really?
Well,
okay.
No, but it really challenges what you think you know, and then you go back. Or watching The Chosen right now, so many people are watching The Chosen, and then if you go into any board where there's comments about an episode or whatever, well, this didn't really happen. This isn't in the Bible, and it's like, no, it's not supposed to, but it still opens your mind to possibilities and to the lenses that you're talking about. And I think that's especially for me, the older I've gotten, hopefully the more mature I've gotten, you tend to look at things and you want more from them than you did before. It has to have more meaning than this for me now. And when you go searching, you find those things. And I think you have to give God credit when you're in your Bible and you're praying that He's also providing those answers. So I think that's just a natural progression.
Well, and also be aware of the fact that you bring your own thing to the text. And so even just sort of critically analyzing yourself and asking yourself, what is it I'm trying to accomplish here with this particular reading, I think can be a really good self-reflection.
Am I going to be happy or sad when I decide what I wanted to get out of this? And it either is or isn't there. Yeah. All right. Well, we have one comment, and this was from Mariana Parente, and I thought it was really, really good. She said, first of all, these sermon series Follow Me have been amazing. I'm still processing Josh Wood's sermon, as it was extremely impactful. And Ken's sermon this week spoke to me in a way that confirmed something I've been considering for a while. Here we go. This is, again, when you're hearing. As someone who has been Adventist all my life, I've always felt like the rules I was raised under were always so restrictive and kept me captive from enjoying life in a way. I know it sounds bad, but if I'm being honest, living under these commandments, plus the unofficial ones that the church expects you to follow, can be quite suffocating. It wasn't too long ago that I started seeing this differently. I'm in my 2nd year of reading the whole Bible, and as I was reading Genesis again, God spoke to me about the Garden of Eden and made me think about it in a different way. Notice how the only restriction God gave was that the tree which they could not eat from. However, that restriction actually set them free because it was a limit which they could enjoy themselves rather than make them slaves of that restriction. As a mother of 3, I understand that children thrive when they have limits because it sets them free to enjoy their lives knowing how far they can go. Limits bring security and as a result, freedom. It's a bit counterintuitive, but it's absolutely true. As I listened to Ken's sermon this week, twice as I translated for the second service, it brought me to my mind.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Exactly. It brought to my mind how much God is truly our Father, and these limits He instituted are really to give us freedom. It's absolutely a mind-blowing and life-changing discovery.
Cool.
And I think a lot of what she had to say was in answer to some of those questions. Reading the Bible again, going through things, finding in. Hey, there you go. God spoke to her while going through another text that she could take something different and change her view on something. So,
yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Being in the Word and praying, it's not not to be discounted either. So,
also, I got a really nice message from Karen in Alberta this week. So just shout out to Karen. Thanks for listening to the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Karen, that's awesome.
I do want to say one thing. It goes all the way back to the beginning, and I think Melanie was closer in that definition. I think as I look at it, it's on the positive and negative reinforcement piece. How we look at it, it should be just basically anything we can do to encourage a positive outcome would be positive reinforcement. Anything we can do to
remove
or avoid, avoid or keep from happening a negative outcome would be negative reinforcement.
Okay.
And that's sort of what she said as she said to the piece.
That's a 360, right? Or that's a complete
bookend.
Yeah.
And might I close with this thought?
Let's do it.
It is for freedom that Christ has set you free.
There you go.
I like that. Okay, so we're back with Follow Me Out series next week with last page.
This is Easter weekend, so let me think. What could it be out of?
What would it be?
What would you say? What would you guess it could be, Jeff? Out of what?
Oh,
sin and despair.
I don't know.
Would it be the grave?
Good job, Jeff.
Nice one. Yeah.
Well,
that's excellent.
My third page of notes says error, invalid font, offending command, define the font, and it comes from a stack.
It's like
in the
a sermon we should be preaching.
It comes from the stack in the font.
That's Ken's next series.
Offending commands.
Yeah, that's from the font. That's a missing stack out of the font dictionary from our copy machine here.
But yes, definitely this coming weekend is our Easter celebration.
Yeah.
So we're doing Follow Me Out of the Grave.
9:30 and noon.
That's right.
We have services at 9:30 at noon. We just encourage you to bring your friends, your family, people you don't know.
I'm bringing my mom and dad.
Bring them.
Awesome.
There you go.
Bring them. It's going to be. I can just tell you, Melanie has written just this beautiful, poetic intro kind of to the whole thing. That's just, it's going to be special.
Looking forward to it.
Oh, Tenebrae at 7 p.m. this Thursday.
On Thursday night, Tenebrae here. We're celebrating that with
New City
Church, which uses our facility on Sunday morning. So we're partnering up with them on that. Excited, and thank you, New City, for letting us be a part of that and joining your family and ours together. And we're really excited about that.
Yeah. So if you're catching this before Thursday or during Thursday, 7 p.m., you may have time to make it.
We do want to remind people, though, Tenebrae is not a exactly like a joyful. Upbeat event. It is considering the suffering of Christ, and so it is a little bit on the dark side.
It's going to be somber, reflective.
Somber, yeah.
Tenebrae actually means darkness or shadow of death. So be prepared for that. The celebration comes when we get together on Saturday morning.
Yeah, that's great. I like it. Ken always says that there's never a bad week to invite someone to WholeLife Church, but I think this is a week that if you're going to do it, let's go all in.
It's an especially good week.
Go all in. How about that T-shirt? Maybe you should be wearing it all week and then seeing if someone wants to follow you to WholeLife this Easter.
Don't wash it.
You took the challenge
until Friday, and then because then but that might actually repel people
that may
from following you. So
they'll follow at a distance.
Use your wisdom.
Just wash it every day.
Do it during Tenebrae, and then they'll be like, "Man, that really did stink, didn't it?"
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
Okay.
Wow, that's enough.
Okay.
It's time to wrap up. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all the shares. I'm really encouraged by that when we went and checked this week, and so you guys are doing a great job. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.